See. Hello. Welcome to the Marathon County Historical Society's History Chats. We are going to be going to Gary in a second, who's going to be telling us all about the early history of the schools in Wausau. So this would be great. Just to kind of give the format for those of you watching, welcome. We're going to have about 10 minutes where Gary's going to go through his prepared history, and then we're going to have a section for questions. So if you have any questions or comments, put them in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer some questions then. So with no further ado, I'll turn it over to Gary and let him do his thing. This video. So you can unmute. All right, you should be good. Sorry about that. Might need to reset.
I think I may need to go back. Okay, good afternoon. Sorry for this little delay here, but we'll welcome this afternoon. We starting this new way of presenting history. So welcome aboard. Glad to have you here, and we will be continuing these series throughout the next several weeks. So this is the first one in the series on schools of Marathon County and Wausau. Today we're talking a little bit about the early schools of Wausau. Of course, in the early days, we just want to take a look here a little bit about the growth of the city of Wausau. Since 1839, when George Stevens came up the Wisconsin River and began the little settlement here, it took a while for it to take off. Sometimes doubling, sometimes tripling. And you'll notice that between 1870 and 1880, and then again in 1890, the population really did escalate. And at this time, the city fathers really decided that it was time to educate our young people, and thus the story of early schools here in Wausau begins. In the early days, Wausau looked like this. This was the city of Wausau in the 1970s, mostly on the east side of the city, of course. That's where the population was. That's where the manufacturing was. That's where the sawmills were. So we see it. We see it on the east side, a little bit on the west side, and then of course we see the railroad coming up on the east side of Wausau. That was a major indicator of the growth of the city, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. In the early days, there were children to be taught, and the city did teach them, and mostly in homes or storefronts. But it wasn't until 1862 that the first schoolhouse was built, so-called the White School at 408 Fifth Street. This was a two-story white clapboard building having elementary classes. High school classes would be coming later. This served as an elementary classroom for the city of Wausau from 1862 to 1889. The location of it was on Fifth Street between Jefferson and Scott Street, basically in back of what we would now know as the Grand Theater. Some of the landmarks on the corner of Fifth and Scott up the street a little bit would be an older Zion Lutheran Church. But we see that, again, the schools are pretty much at this point centered in the city of, in the center of the city. But then in 10 years later, the city fathers decided that it was time for a much more substantial building. So thus the Humboldt School in 1873 was built. This was a graded elementary school, as well as the beginnings of a high school. So high school classes were now being held here at the Humboldt School. It burned to the ground in 1924, but it was the early high school classes were being held here. It is located in the next block from the old white school between Jefferson and Scott Street, closer to 6th Street. But that was the location of the old Humboldt School. In 1924, it burned down, and the headline in the newspaper made specific note that it was a landmark. It was pretty much the pride and joy of the city of Wausau for many years. In the early days of Wausau, the alarm system, as you can see, was defective, and the firefighters went to Longfellow. But the essence of this was that it was really a landmark, and the community really did lament the fact that this landmark was reduced to rubble by the fire. The next school that we want to talk about is the Foundry School, built in 1880. If you remember, the population really started to escalate at that time. I don't have a picture of the Foundry School, 1880, 2nd Street at Fulton. We are now starting to see the movement of schools into neighborhoods, serving the population as the population started to grow. So the Foundry School is on 2nd Street, in back of the Murray Machinery Foundry and Machine Shop on 3rd Street. So this was here for quite a while until we see until the new school is being built into Franklin School up the street a little bit later. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Moving to the west side, now we see that the growth of the population by 1881 is starting to move over to the west side. We call this the old Grant School, 1881, corner of First Avenue, North First Avenue and Cedar Street. We don't have a picture of that either, but this is a unique story, starting to provide children whose parents were working in the factories on the west side, Curtis and Yale, Mortenson Stone lumber mill. So again, we see the movement of the schools into the neighborhoods of Wausau. This is a picture of the Columbia School, 1885, demolished in 1920. We don't have a very good picture, but we were able to find this. This is up on the northwest side of Wausau, starting to serve the children of what we would call the Parcherville neighborhood, up near the old Schofield Mill, and the future home of Marathon Electric. You can see it there in this new development in the Columbia addition, up off of what would become eventually First Avenue. At that time, it was called Pine Street. This is a picture of the Columbia School. The classroom brick, pretty much all the buildings at that time were in brick, using the variety of the brick factories in the metropolitan area. Soon thereafter came the Franklin School in 1885 to 1970 at 508 Bridge Street. This is really the second building on Bridge Street. There was a 2 classroom building here prior, but in 1894, this building was built. It is located on Bridge Street between 5th and 6th Streets. It says Jefferson School on the map. Evidently, the school board people were thinking that this would be a Jefferson School, but eventually it did turn into be calling Franklin School. Eventually, in 1907, this Franklin School was expanded a great deal. The population in this area was increasingly growing, so they really had to expand this school quite a bit. One of the unusual stories of Franklin School is that the playground was across the street. So children would have to cross Bridge Street every day, every recess, every noon hour to get to their playground. But in the 1930s, taking advantage of civilian work administration monies, there was a subway or a tunnel built underneath Bridge Street so that the children would not have to cross Bridge Street. They could use the tunnel to come across and play in there, and for recesses and noon hours, they could come across that and use the playground across the street. We'll talk more about the history of Franklin in future programs, but I just wanted to mention this because this was sort of a key part of their history well into the 20th century. The next school that we want to talk about a little bit is the Washington School, which has another unique history, graded elementary school, but this took over the high school functions, the high school grades from the Humboldt School. And so this served both as an elementary school as well as the high school until the new high school was built in 1898 through 1899. This was raised in 1975. It is located on the corner of 5th and Jefferson. If you remember the old white school or that primary school, the new Washington School was built on that corner. Basically, same as what I said before. Basically, in the backyard of the Grand Theater. We now see Lincoln School, 1892 to 1970 at 320 South Fifth Avenue, a large Romanesque building, almost a Queen Anne, a wonderful, gigantic Lincoln School here on Fifth Avenue. It served here on the west side until 1970, when the new Lincoln School was built south of Marathon Park. But it served really as a major school on the west side for a long time, serving that neighborhood. And this is the location of it, a little bit north of Stewart Avenue on Fifth Avenue. Again, serving that neighborhood, that growing neighborhood of the west side. A little further on now we'll talk a little bit about the 1890s. In 1894, the Irving School at 833 South 3rd Avenue. It was basically an elementary school designed by Henry Van Ryn. We know that Henry Van Ryn and de Galkey were major architects in this city, designing a lot of schools and a lot of houses. A major architect designing the Irving School. The Irving School here contained the first kindergarten of the city of Wausau. There were a variety of additions to this, now serves as an office building, and it served as a classroom until 1970. And this is the location of it on Sherman Street, Sherman and 3rd Avenue, serving that southern, southwestern part of the city. a variety of factories into the neighborhood, Underwood Veneer and a variety of other factories into that neighborhood. Then came, in that same year, came the Longfellow School in 1894, serving the southeast side. It was on Seymour Street, again designed by Henry Van Ryn. It is on Seymour Street, the location of it here on Seymour Street, off of Grand Avenue. It is now it has become the administrative offices of the Wausau School District. And I want to finish with the building of the Wausau High School in 1898, 1899, really becoming the pride and joy of the city of Wausau. This was really a remarkable high school. This was their first really dedicated high school in the city. Those efforts before, those classes were pretty much at Washington School, but now it was pretty much dedicated to the high school students of the city of Wausau. So in the early days, there were some elementary classes being held, but eventually it would serve as a high school this building would serve well into the 20th century. We'll talk a little bit about that in future episodes. This is the location of the high school on Fulton. And you notice on the map that there was some athletic grounds to the north. In the early days, that's where all the activities of the high school were in back. And we'll talk about that and the growth of that high school in future episodes of this presentation. So with that, I close and turn it back to Ben.
Yeah, awesome. Actually, I'm going to mute you just for a little bit so I don't get the echo here. So yeah, we're going to open it up to questions. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. In the meantime, I'm just going to tell you about some other stuff that's coming up. If you're interested in this sort of history and online content, we are going to actually be having some more of these. And Gary's is going to be doing more of these as sort of a short-term lunchtime entertainment. But we also have some bigger events, such as not this weekend, but the weekend after, the 17th or the 19th of September. We'll be talking about women's suffrage in Marathon County. So this will be sort of a longer presentation that you can join us for, and we'll get into some of the interesting aspects of how women here were or were not involved in the wider movement. So that should be a lot of fun. We got some more of those coming up as well, but I also want to mention this is being presented in cooperation with the Marathon County Public Library. And our friends there have a great event coming up here. Let's see, the Central Wisconsin Book Festival. If you're not aware of this, it's a week-long of events, of readings and interviews and discussions and things, and it's going to be all online this year. So if you're interested in this sort of thing, check them out. There's some great events coming there. So with that, let's see if anybody has any questions, and if not, maybe I'll throw some over to Gary. Okay. Well, I guess if anybody has any other questions, let's see, what can we say? Gary.
Well, I can.
Yeah. Do you want to?
I can just speak a little bit to the future.
Yeah. Hold on. Let me unmute. You can unmute yourself here. Sorry, because I can't. There you go.
So just a little bit to, this began our series with the early schools of Wausau. Future ones will center on the rural schools, and we'll be moving into some schools of the 20th century. So I think there's going to be 3 more episodes of the history of schools in Wausau and Marathon County. So we look forward to presenting those. I think they will be sort of what I would hope will be a culmination of a program that I was going to be doing earlier in the year So we're dividing it up and present it in this format. And we hope that you certainly will continue to join us as we go forth.
Yeah, absolutely. I did see that, let's see, Linda Larmier, sorry if I got your name wrong there, asked if we have any interior photos of the individual schools. I know sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Is that, did you find that we had a hard time finding?
Sometimes we do have a hard time finding even exterior shots of some of the early schools. And sometimes we do have a variety of classroom pictures of classes. You know, sometimes teachers would come through with a camera and take interior shots, but that's with a variety of classes, but not, you know, speaking to the architecture or the layout of the school itself, not many, pretty much of classrooms, but not of the interior looks of a lot of those schools. For instance, Franklin School would love to have some interior shots of the way that school looked way back when, or even the high school. You know, if you were at the old Wausau High School on Fulton, the old building, you can remember, but you know, we would need pictures to again recall exactly what those hallways look like. Quite a building at that time.
Yeah, we'll probably see more pictures we could include in the future. Obviously, you're talking about the 1800s where cameras are not quite as common, or, you know, interior light is a little harder to capture. So maybe we'll see more of that in the future. And let's see, and I also just saw here, yeah, look, there's some enthusiasm for some of the future programs. Asked if we could talk a little bit more about some of the schools later on, which is, oh, yeah.
So if there would be comments or suggestions, or, you know, we're certainly taking, and we look forward to any kind of comments or suggestions that you would have as we go forth. My email is research@marathoncountyhistory.org. Marathon County History is one word. .org, and we certainly would be looking forward to any comments for suggestions as we go forward.
Yeah, and we're going to be leaving this up as a recording later, both on our YouTube and our Facebook. So if you're missed part of this, came late, you'll be able to catch the whole thing if you want to go back and hear all of that. And then, you know, we'll check the comments there too. So if there are anything you want to see, we can take a look at that. So yeah, I think that's probably a good length here for today. Thanks to everybody who joined us. Be here again next week, the same time, Thursday at 12:30. So hope to see you then.